Hi, and welcome to this episode of the CDNify podcast. So today I'm really excited to announce that we're going to be joined by Harry Roberts.
Hey, how are you?
Very well, thanks, Harry. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Great. So for those of you who don't know, Harry is the author of CSS Wizardry. He's the creator of Inuit CSS, and he's widely recognized as an expert on all things CSS related. So to kick things off, I thought an interesting thing to talk about would be the growth of CSS frameworks.
Sure, yeah.
So from your perspective as a front-end developer, are they a good thing or can they be restrictive?
I've got a bit of an awkward answer to that one, actually, because in the last sort of 6 weeks, I've been giving quite a few talks, and one of them has been about CSS frameworks. And I think the question is actually first working out which things are CSS frameworks and which ones aren't. So I'm a fan of them, but only if it's actually a framework that we're discussing. So
okay, that's an interesting. Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting analysis of it. So do you want to explain a bit more?
Yeah, well, so my take on it is a framework in its truest sense. If you actually look at the definition of framework, it's a concept that underlies a system.
Yeah.
So a framework's like a series of principles or schools of thought. So it should be a very fairly unopinionated tool. But I think a lot of the things that are getting touted as CSS frameworks are, I actually refer to them as UI toolkits. They're a lot more complete, a lot more polished. So, you might have a framework that deals with architectural stuff, or it might help you scaling a front end. Then you'd have a UI toolkit, which would have buttons in there, and it might have a drop down or a sort of a responsive nav. Yeah. So I think if we are discussing a true CSS framework, I think they're massively useful. I've built one myself, so I think there's a lot of value in using a framework, and that's something I learned a lot from software engineers. They use a ton of open source stuff, and front end developers don't seem to be quite as into the open source movement. So yeah, I think if it is a true CSS framework, they're absolutely really, really useful. However, if you're using a UI toolkit and expecting it to act like a framework, expecting it to be quite hands-off, I think that's when you can get limited. So
for you, if it's truly a framework, it basically gets out of your way.
Exactly, yeah. So a framework's like a productivity tool, isn't it? So you might use a framework and write tons of your own stuff on top of it. Whereas a UI toolkit, you drop it in, it'd do most of the work for you. I guess it's comparable to Symfony is a PHP framework, but WordPress is an actual product. You don't really write much of your own code on top of WordPress because it's not a framework. It's like it's a tool out of the box. And I think we never make that distinction with CSS stuff. We always call everything a framework when actually some of it's a UI toolkit and some of it is a framework.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting way of looking at it, and it's never really something that I'd thought about before. But absolutely, I can see what you mean, definitely. So can you give us some examples of frameworks versus UI kits, or examples of something that is typically referred to as a framework but is actually more of a UI kit?
So a lot of people complain. Yeah, so if someone's using a UI toolkit and expecting it to get out of their way, then
it's not going to
happen, is it? Because its point is to be in your way because it's already finished. So I think that's a lot of the reason why people give CSS frameworks a lot of stick, why people hate on them quite a lot, is because they're just kind of confusing a UI toolkit and a CSS framework. It's something I managed to get a 45-minute talk out of it, so it's something I do like wittering on about.
Okay, so at CDNify we use Bootstrap, which I have to admit, there's a lot of predetermined styles in there, and then what our developers have to do is obviously override them, and then we create our kind of CSS style guide out of that, or that sort of sits on top of it, really. So I guess, I don't mind Bootstrap. I think I managed to get my head around it pretty quickly, and I'm not, I do more marketing, but I do deal with CSS on a regular basis because I'm building landing pages. So I guess the common thing that people say about Bootstrap is that it's incredibly bloated. So I guess if someone is thinking about using a framework or in their project, are there any frameworks that you would recommend?
Yeah, well, so that's an interesting point, actually. So what I should also have mentioned is that there's nothing wrong with having a UI toolkit. Things like Bootstrap, Foundation, I think they really empower people to just build prototypes and build things really quickly, and there's a lot of value in that, from a business point of view or from just getting something in front of someone point of view. So yeah, I certainly don't think there's anything wrong with things like Bootstrap. I'm very biased, so I would say that if you were going to start a fairly large project, I would always use my own framework, Inuit. Its principles are around sort of scalability and maintainability and the ability to sort of manage and grow a code base.
Okay.
I usually work with designers, so we have designs that obviously Bootstrap would be unsuitable for because the designs would be totally different.
Yeah.
So if we need something that's going to last for a while, we've got our own design. I'd use Inuit or there's Suit CSS by a guy called Nicholas Gallagher, SUIT. So yeah, Suit CSS is fantastic. That's like a really decoupled collection of objects and abstractions, and that's completely design free. That's quite impressive. It's worth a look.
Yeah, no, I'll check that out. I haven't heard of Suit CSS before, actually.
No, it's good. It's by the same guy who did Normalize CSS. He's fairly prolific.
Yeah, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, yeah, I think that's definitely quite interesting. So the next question I have, I was wondering, I guess the other thing that's kind of quite a hot topic right now is CSS preprocessors and which one to use. So I was wondering, where do you stand on the SASS versus less debate? Do you have an opinion on that?
I have my opinion. I wouldn't force it on anyone else. I just started using SASS a couple of years ago. In fact, maybe 2 years ago, purely because at the time it was streets ahead of less.
Right.
It had better features then. It just seemed a little more powerful. But I know tons of people use less, so it can't be a bad tool. I've never used it myself. So yeah, my opinion's kind of it could have fallen either way. It was just at the time I started using a preprocessor. SASS was the better one. It was interesting actually. Our DevOps guys at Sky would have preferred if I'd have chosen less because their build process didn't have any Ruby dependencies. It didn't need Ruby in there. Right. Yeah. Of course. And we started using SASS at a time when it was only Ruby that would compile it. So it would have been tons easier for us to have used a Node.js based preprocessor, but I completely didn't think, and I just picked SASS because it was a better tool at the time. Yeah. So yeah, there'll be tons of stuff to influence your decision. I prefer SASS. It seems most people use SASS. But yeah, I think less caught a lot of the designers because when they both appeared on the scene, SASS's website was just so ugly. Yeah, it was pretty terrible. It was horrible, wasn't it? Yeah. They've redesigned it now, so it's like it's a lot better. Pegging. Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, I like I say, I have my opinion, but it's not something I'd strongly advise anyone on either way. Okay, so I mean, I guess the other thing that's quite on trend at the moment in terms of front end processes is or back end in general development is build processes. So for example, at CDNify we use Gulp, which pretty much it massively cuts down our development time. I think it's brilliant, and it's it also helps to increase performance. So I was kind of wondering, do you use an automated task runner like Gulp or Grunt, and or just in general, what tools do you use in your workflow? So this is where I'm really guilty. I don't use any task runners or anything for myself because any project I work on, we've usually got an ops team, a DevOps team there. We've usually got software engineers who have their build processes all set up. Right. So my work tends to just slot into whatever they're doing. Right. So is that because you're predominantly working as a freelancer now? So they have their processes and systems in place. Well, yes and no. I mean, when I used to work full time at Sky, and they had a massive engineering team, so I just slotted into what they did, and I don't really do any dev work at all anymore. I've actually gone more consultancy than freelance. Okay. So I typically don't write much code for clients anymore. I'm going to start on a new project at the moment, or I'm sort of beginning to start on it. Yeah. And I think that's when I'll dive into getting Gulp or Grunt set up. But yeah, I always feel really embarrassed answering that question because I should probably have an answer, shouldn't I? Well, I mean, I guess there's an argument to say that if you know what you're doing, if you're writing your code well in the first instance, that you don't necessarily need to prettify it or yeah. Well, I certainly think there's build processes are really important. If you're going to build a decent size or decently running site, I think you'd you'd always tend to go for a some kind of task runner or build process. But like, so most of the projects I've worked on, well, all of them at Sky, we had a very, very thorough sort of continuous. Oh, I can't say it. CI setup.
Yeah.
Let's say CI.
Okay.
And then all the stuff I've done since, clients have had their things already in place, or I've not been doing much dev work. But yeah, so how are you finding Gulp? Because I know that Grunt was like the thing for ages, and then Gulp seemed to appear almost overnight.
Yeah, well, we started off using Grunt, and again, it was really good. And I think just from our developers then kind of discovered Gulp afterwards. And we basically started using Gulp instead, just because I think for various reasons, really. But generally, yeah, I think they're, like I said, I think they're brilliant. I think they're completely, like, it just cuts so much time out of development. There's little things that we wouldn't necessarily have to think about that we know Gulp's going to pick up.
It's taken care of, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So it just means, you can make a really kind of fast modular site without without worrying about these kind of certain intricacies, basically.
Yeah, it's definitely something. I mean, it's been on my to-do list for quite a while, actually, because it's just good to know these things, and also the fact that I'm compiling SASS and then checking that into a code base isn't the best thing to do. So I guess there's tons of things that I'll need to know, but I've just not got around to it, which is a real shame, actually. I need to book some time out to take a look. Yeah,
I mean, it's definitely worth looking into. I think it's quite important for us, definitely. I mean, I guess really it's about optimizing your front end, isn't it? I mean, obviously, like CDNify, it's a CDN, so I kind of think like front end optimization and CDN, they kind of go hand in hand, really.
Exactly, it's your business, isn't it? Performance.
Well, yeah. I guess. I mean, that's it. If you're looking to create a light, fast-weight site, then those two things are going to like massively help you. Put the front end on a CDN and distribute it that way. Mm-hmm. So actually, just sort of thinking about that. Are there any sort of front end optimization techniques or best practices that you follow that you would like to see more people following?
I guess there's not one particular set of things that I wish people would do more, because what I love about performance is the amount of curveballs. It's just there's no real rule, is there? I mean, you've got stuff. Here's a really interesting one. At Sky, we used to serve our static assets off a subdomain.
Right.
It wasn't CDN because we only operated within the UK, so having boxes closer to people geographically we didn't really need that.
Yeah.
But we found stuff like everyone always tells you put all your static assets on a subdomain or a CDN. But then if that incurs a new DNS lookup and you're trying to get to CSS, that's going to incur fresh DNS lookups.
Yes, potentially.
And all this stuff. And your CSS is on the critical path. So we found that following the best practice of putting CSS on a subdomain made our render time, our page load, it slowed it down massively.
Right, because it's posting off a request every time then, essentially.
Yeah, it had to warm up a new DNS connection and fire off. And that, for me, that's my I love sort of telling that little anecdote to clients, because it's the kind of thing that says that it kind of just really exemplifies the fact that with performance stuff, there's no one hard and fast rule.
No,
You've
absolutely.
got to keep testing things and seeing how it performs. I just find it absolutely fascinating. I wish everyone would just get a little more interested in it, particularly clients, and it sounds really horrible of me, like whitewashing, but and particularly designers.
Yeah.
Me and my girlfriend have just wrapped up a project that we're working on together, and my girlfriend's a fantastic designer, really, really good. She's mainly on the branding, and she comes from a print background, so she hasn't had any sort of. She's a fantastic web designer, but she's very, very creative, very visual, and I'm a real hard ass performance guy.
Yeah.
And seeing those two minds meet has been really interesting. So I've really enjoyed sort of teaching her about the importance of performance.
Yeah.
And the best thing about performance is it's all numbers, so you can measure it and you can prove it.
That was definitely, yeah.
So we just got a client's homepage down from 1.6 meg and 74 requests to 450 kilobytes and 19 requests.
That's great.
And so the client's super happy, and it's great seeing us as a team working like that. So I just think everyone should get on the performance bandwagon at the moment. It's It's really important and really fascinating.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree, obviously. Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's interesting, your point about clients. It's about having to get them to buy into performance, really.
Yeah, it's and you wouldn't think it'd be such a hard sell, would you? I mean,
no, absolutely not. I mean, I think
it'd just be a complete no-brainer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it affects your conversion rate. I think that's the way, say, I would sell it to someone potentially if it was, a business owner.
Yeah,
and I
definitely.
think, I mean, I've got friends. I used to work in agencies, and I've got friends that work in agencies, and they are still in agencies now and have a hard time selling performance. They have a hard time selling, a lot of these things. Why they should use a task runner in big sort of enterprise projects and stuff like that.
Do you think that's maybe because the agency model's a little
outdated?
Well, yeah, I was going to say this could get really controversial really quickly. But
could be, yeah.
Do you think that because agencies always open with the same thing, it's all about wooing the client. If it's pitch work, they'll design the blingiest, most amazing PSDs.
Yeah.
So straight away, the first thing the client hears about is, "Look how awesome this is," and no one ever opens with, "Hey, well, you're an e-commerce site. What are your numbers like currently? We should make it tons faster."
Yeah.
I just think maybe they're selling the wrong thing too early means it's hard to sell something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Boring later on.
Yeah, and I think that's certainly. I guess with agencies, that's a particular problem, isn't it? It's the way that you would sell something. It's the account manager that sells something to the client, and really, the performance is probably not on the account manager's mind in the slightest.
Yeah, I mean, and to an extent, nor should it be. I think.
No, exactly. Yeah.
I think developers need to make themselves a lot more involved in things earlier on where they can. And of course, this is talking at a very high level. I'm sure there are agencies out there who are perfect in doing all this stuff.
Oh yeah, completely. On. Yeah, I mean, like Tihan Lax are a good example, probably.
Yeah. But it's interesting. I think. Do you have like an agency style background, or did you just go straight into product stuff, or did you have a even more?
I have quite a varied background myself, but I worked in agencies for a few years and worked on mainly multi-platform projects, so projects that sit alongside TV shows.
All right, cool. So I don't know if you'd agree with this, but starting to work product, you start to get obviously CDNify is a products business.
Yeah,
and I worked on Sky's betting and gaming platform stuff. Mm-hmm. So that was very, very business oriented.
Yeah.
You can start to make those decisions yourselves. Like you can have a meeting and say, look, performance is one of our, it's not a thing that would be nice to have. It's actually going to be a business objective.
Absolutely.
And obviously you guys have that because it's what you're all about. But I find that really interesting at Sky, that this complete shift, this complete different paradigm to agency land where we actually had a performance engineering team whose job it was to look at waterfall charts and just make stuff fast.
Yeah.
And that was such a nice environment to be in.
I think you're completely right. I think it's a case of when you're working on a product, you understand that product a lot more closely.
And you've probably got a little more, you understand it more, and you probably sort of bought into it a little more.
Yeah, definitely.
When you work at an agency, you understand that you could be working on anything at any given time. Whereas you go and choose to work at CDNify, you choose to work at Sky.
Yeah.
You're kind of a lot more bought into the ethos and the health of that product right from beginning to end, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think you're completely right. I think it's like it's a very different way of working. My personal preference is definitely working on products. I think it's a more of a long-term thing. I mean, a lot of what I do is content strategy and UX, and it's very difficult to actually really understand a client's customers because they're not my customers.
Yeah.
So even though you're selling user-centered design, you're actually kind of a little bit divorced from the users that you're supposed to be designing for.
No, totally. Yeah, it's a good point, isn't it?
Mm.
Especially when you've got you might be working on sort of 3 different clients, customers in any sort of 6-week period. To shop and change between different sort of types of people.
Yeah, completely.
It's quite difficult.
Yeah. So, okay, so let's get back to a question. I think, I guess if someone's looking to get into CSS to a higher level, are there any resources out there online that you would recommend that people should be reading?
I think one of the best things you could do, rather than a resource straight away, would be understanding the headaches that you get on projects. So a lot of people don't. Certainly, I was guilty of this sort of 3-4 years ago. I didn't really get how complex CSS can be. It wasn't until I started working product that I realised that, holy shit, I've got to look after this for 3 years. Like, I can't. Yeah. So I think if you can get in a situation where you really empathise or understand the issues you might be up against, that's probably the best. Rather than looking for the solution, basically, you should probably make sure you've understood the problem. That sounds so cheesy. But that really helps. And then after that, I really recommend Nicole Sullivan's got she gave a talk where she kind of introduced object-oriented CSS, and that's called Our Best Practices Are Killing Us. That gives a real pragmatic, fresh look at the state of CSS. That was a real light bulb moment for me. Nicole's done some fantastic work. Do you have notes after the podcast?
I do. We'll put a blog post together with it in. So what I'll do is if you could, and I'll stick them in the blog post so people can use them.
Cool. Yeah. So that talk. Nicole's also got a blog post about the media object.
Right.
Jonathan Snook has got an amazing book called SMACS, Scalable Modular Architecture for CSS.
That I've been meaning to read, actually.
It's incredible. It's just really well put together and just nicely written. It's not heavy going, and it really helps put things into perspective. And he's done a really good job with that.
Okay.
And then one thing I find really interesting is you only do like a view source on Facebook.com, Google.com, and you see all this horrible, nasty, ugly-looking code. Well, I spend a lot of time picking through nasty-looking code because I'm thinking, well, they've done this for a reason, and what could that reason be? Facebook have got some very clever engineers. I'm sure they're not just mashing the keyboard until things work.
Yeah.
So picking apart big site CSS can be really quite revealing. So yeah, that's stuff like that. I just find it's all about looking at things critically. I mean, a lot of what I've done throughout my career in front-end development is always questioning things and seeing how things can be done better. You just got someone writes that you should use super semantic classes, like questioning that, seeing what they actually mean, seeing if you could do anything better by not doing that. So that's all the advice I've really got for CSS at a higher level. It becomes a different ballgame, really.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I guess, and lastly, are there any projects that you're working on at the moment that you'd like to tell the audience about? Is there any projects that you can tell the audience about?
Well, I've just wrapped up a really nice project with the NHS, which was cool. So this one I'm really excited about. I'm not even sure how much I can say about it.
Right.
But I mentioned before I don't really do much dev work anymore. This is one of only 2 dev projects I've done since I started working for myself.
Right. Okay.
And someone from the NHS got in touch because they'd seen a talk of mine, or they were aware of who I was.
Right.
And I was like, NHS, it's going to be Cold Fusion and IE6 but this guy was awesome. He got in touch and he's like, hey, look, we know we need you. We need someone like you. Can you come in and meet us? And so I went in and so I've been working on a project for the NHS, which was built on Ruby because, they fancied giving Ruby a go, and it was well suited to the type of project. Everything was done in Sketch instead of like clunky old PSDs that were printed out. We did a lot of designing in the browser, got to use SASS and Inuit. Everything was done in Trello and not like some kind of clunky waterfall thing. So I've just come out of a really fantastic project with NHS, which has been a real eye-opener.
Sounds great.
It was a really ambitious, very rapid, like a e-learning platform thing for the NHS.
Yeah.
Tons of fun, but no, it's really fun. I just had no idea that people in the NHS were that, switched on, clued up. So you always hear horror stories, don't you?
The Daily Mail definitely,
say NHS wastes $2 million on
on
IT
CMS.
Contract. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's been really cool. And coming up, I'm actually writing a mini book myself at the moment.
Okay.
I'm hoping, if I say it now, you'll have to hold me to it.
Yeah.
I'm hoping to give it away for free.
Okay.
And cover, get sponsors, monthly sponsors on board to support the site. I'm going to write it as a web-based book. It's not going to be an ebook or anything.
Right, okay.
Like a series of blog posts. I bought the domain got a Twitter account, so that's obviously official.
Right.
Nothing's official until you've got a Twitter account for it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So
it used to be the domain, didn't it? But now it's the Twitter account.
Yeah, exactly. So starting to write a book, which should be fun. It's about kind of a sort of proprietary, if you like, CSS architecture of mine that I talk to clients about a lot and workshop attendees.
Yeah.
So I'm writing that up into a more formal. It's going to be long form blog posts, basically split into chapters. But that's something I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into.
Great, that sounds really interesting. Definitely, you'll have to let us know about it when it's live.
Oh, cool! I will do.
Great. Okay.
How about you guys? Anyway, can I ask about you guys? Have we got time for that?
Because sure. Of course we can.
You're only over the Pennines.
That's right. Yeah, we're in Manchester. So so we're a content delivery network. We've been going publicly for about just over a year, actually. So we're really kind of very much focused on just making your apps and websites a lot faster. We're about supercharging them, making sure that your users get your content as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. We do certain things like, so we automatically, when you set up a resource, we call it, so a resource could be a website. Mm-hmm. So when you set up a resource, we automatically assign a shared SSL certificate, so making it more secure, obviously. And then we kind of, we have different things like we allow people to add custom SSL and things like that for free.
Yeah, cool.
Which is, I think it's becoming more and more important, things like that, certainly in terms of security and things.
It's fantastic. When you emailed me initially, I was like, CDNify, I've heard that name. And then I was expecting, as you do, San Francisco. Yeah. And I was like, holy shit, Manchester, how cool is that? It's nice to see. Yeah,
no, I know. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, no, I think that this is it. I mean, we're very much focused on good front end, really. Definitely. I think it's performance is massively important, like you were saying earlier.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
I think if we can help people, make their webs and apps perform a bit better, then great, really.
Oh, good stuff. Well, best of luck.
Thanks very much. Cheers. Okay, right. Well, thanks very much for joining us today, Harry, and good luck with everything.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers.
Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, you too. Bye-bye.
See ya.